To the left-hand side for Vieira, who'll play it through to Gabriel Jesus, who's in here for Arsenal. Gabriel Jesus to finish it off. Oh, what a way to do it! Gabriel Jesus seals the points for Arsenal. He's back, and he's back with a bang.
Into the penalty area it goes. Gabriel's header, and it's into the back of the net. Arsenal take an early lead through Gabriel.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the daily Arsenal podcast with me, Harry Symeou.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Hope you're good, hope you're well. Welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. And on today's episode, we're going to be looking ahead to that big old game on Saturday, a trip to Villa Park for the Arsenal. It wasn't a happy hunting ground for us last season. We were beaten 1-0. We controversially, in my opinion, had what would have been an equalising goal ruled out. Of course, they beat us at the Emirates Stadium as well last season. So we had a pretty torrid time against Unai Emery's side. And maybe there's a little bit of PTSD among the fan base going into what feels like a really, really important game just 2 games in. And it's because we know what we're up against in Manchester City, right? We know that they've been so formidable over the years that any dropped point, no matter how hard the fixture, no matter how the sort of circumstances and the situation plays out, feels like a real massive dent in your title chances. That's where I'm at. That's where a lot of other Arsenal fans are at, I'm sure. And so a game, even 2 games into the season, can feel like it's absolutely huge. And so, yeah, I'm nervous. I got to be honest with you. I'm going to be up at Villa Park tomorrow, so I will be bringing you an episode of the Match Day Reaction Pod over on our Patreon, which you can sign up to for free even until the end of August. You'll get access to all our content until the end of August. And then after that, members with a subscription will be able to access that. And if you decide that you've enjoyed what you've been listening to during that period of time, you can feel free to make that switch over. If not, no hard feelings, I promise, all good. Before we dive into this preview, if you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to leave a like on the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And if you're listening on audio, leave us a review. You know the drill by now. Let me say a few hellos because there's plenty of you joining us in the live chat at the moment. Those of you, I'm sure, are enjoying your morning coffees whilst taking this in. I've had a morning coffee. I feel like I need 2 more, to be honest with you. Let's say hello to, we've got Sammy, we've got Tebow, we've got Baron, we've got Alfred, we've got Coco Bolo, Columbus is with us, Tony Christensen is doing exactly that, having his morning coffee. We've got Haylor, Derek, Afzar, Junior Gunner, lots and lots of you in the live chat, which is, of course, great to see. Quick question in the chat about Mikel Merino. Now, Mikel Arteta in his press conference this morning, from what I could see of it, because it was as if they had a mouse in a wheel, providing the internet stability this morning because the connection was terrible. I didn't catch every single word of it. I've got to be honest. I'm trying to find a transcript of it. There is a bit on football.london, which we'll look at very, very shortly. But Mikel Arteta is still in that place, as you can understand, where he doesn't want to talk about the player. He's not our player, etc., etc. So do I think that it will be announced before the game? Probably not, to be honest with you. There were reports yesterday that he was planning to travel to London today, which means he'll undergo his medical, begin on those club media duties as well. But yeah, I don't know that we're going to get the announcement before. It'd be nice if we do. It might be a nice little boost going into the game. But it feels like this is pretty much done. So there's no need to stress. There's no need to worry. It's a matter of when rather than if now. So yeah, Mikel Merino is almost a gunner. Okay, let's move on from that. We did, if you want to hear a little bit more about Mikel Merino, then you can, of course, go back to yesterday's episode in which we discussed the news shortly after it broke that Arsenal have agreed a deal with Real Sociedad to sign Mikel Merino. We talked about the details of that deal, the price, the financials, etc., etc. So yeah, do go over and check that out if you're interested. But today we're going to talk about the Villa game. So let's try and dissect some of what Mikel Arteta said in his press conference this morning at the Sober Realty Training Centre, otherwise known as London Colney. So, of course, he was asked about Mikel Merino, as I just mentioned, and he said, I cannot talk about any player that's not with us. There's still time in the market. So Mikel Arteta not shutting it down because, he knows that we're not stupid. He knows that these things do get out, that sources do pass on this type of information. Sometimes, hell, even the club do it. They pass on information. They brief people. So he knows that we're aware of this, but obviously he can't say anything until the deal is done. He was asked whether the deal will be done soon. He said, I don't know about soon. The full focus is on the players that we have at the moment. So he's sitting very much on the fence with that too. On Eddie Nketiah, of course, he's been heavily linked with a move to Nottingham Forest over the past week or so. Nothing, as far as we're aware, has progressed to the point where we're ready to say he's on his way. We know that they had an initial offer knocked back for Eddie Nketiah, but the discussions were continuing, that discussions were progressing over the personal terms between the Arsenal striker and Nottingham Forest. But as of this moment right now, we don't know that that's a done deal. Arteta said, I expect Eddie to train with us today, to be prepared for tomorrow. Whatever happens will happen if it is good for everybody. So he's kind of putting that message out there that, look, this has to work for everybody for Arsenal to do this deal. There isn't this desperate want internally to move Eddie Nketiah on. Now, there might be that feeling among the fans, and I think it's probably fair to say that there is. I'm not desperate to see Eddie Nketiah go, but I just don't think we're going to get an opportunity to get that kind of money in for him again. And I think it's become very clear over the last 12 months that he's not at the level that we need, we require. Mikel Arteta obviously doesn't believe that either. Otherwise, he'd have given him way more game time than he has. And so why not cash in? Why not get as much money for him as you possibly can? Another half season or season of Eddie Nketiah sitting on the bench, coming in and out, playing 5-10 minutes here and there, is only going to decrease his value further. So it feels like it's time to sell. And that's why I'm quite keen to see this happen. He was also asked about Jurrien Timber and whether or not he can play in midfield. We talked about this on a show not that long ago. I talked about the fact that, there is Zinchenko in the group. There is Timber in the group. There is Calafiori in the group, all of whom could, even Ben White, you could even throw Ben White into that equation, all of whom could step into midfield and do a job if needed. Now, how well will they do that job? That's obviously up for debate. And, we don't have any tangible proof really to go by. Ben White's played there a few times in the past, not for us, but mainly for Leeds United, sometimes for Brighton too. But the point I'm trying to make is that obviously Mikel Arteta sees these guys as very versatile footballers. And so when I was looking at the midfield and saying it looks short, and that we needed one, and some were saying actually we probably needed two. If there isn't two out there that Mikel feels are suitable, if we don't have the resources to bring in the two, this comment makes it clear that he believes that he has players internally already who could potentially step into those roles and fill those voids if needed. When he was asked if he can play in midfield, he said, yes, he is capable of playing in midfield. That is, he says he can play in various positions. His versatility is one of his biggest strengths. He played some quality minutes the other day, and having that capacity to find what the squad is needing in that minute is really, really valued. Obviously, lots of talk at the moment about Mikel Arteta and the fact that he is yet to sign a new deal with the club. We talked about this briefly on yesterday's show. Am I panicked? Am I worried? No, not really, because it feels like this is a bit like the Mikel Merino transfer, a case of when rather than if. He was asked if he wants to have the kind of longevity at Arsenal that Pep Guardiola has had at Manchester City and that Jurgen Klopp enjoyed at Liverpool. And he said, I see myself today and tomorrow. That's the reality of us as managers. It's something that I actually like, that urgency. Looking in 2 or 3 years, you have to plan. That's our reality. In the meantime, do your best and plan. Didn't really give much away there. I mean, I read the first line and he said, I see myself today and tomorrow, and thought, whoa, is this Mikel Arteta suggesting that he might not commit his future? But then he goes on to elaborate and makes the point that actually he quite likes the whole being on edge thing. The fact that, you do have that pressure to deliver. That's obviously something that he thrives off. He says you always have to look 2 or 3 years in advance. In the meantime, do your best and plan. As I say, I think this is coming. Not worried about this. Not worried about it in the slightest. So yeah, that's where we are in terms of this morning's press conference. Let's move on then and have a look at the history of this fixture. It's one of the old grand Premier League fixtures, really, when you think about it. Plenty of meetings between these two clubs over the years. In fact, 58. We'll dive into how that record looks right after this really short pause. Okay, so Arsenal and Aston Villa, as I mentioned, have met on 58 occasions in Premier League history. Arsenal really, really dominant, though, in this fixture. 31 wins in comparison to Aston Villa's 13. There have been 14 draws away. 14 draws, I beg your pardon, between these two sides throughout the course of the Premier League history. Now, recent meetings haven't looked that good for us. As I mentioned at the top of the show, we had 2 defeats at the hands of Aston Villa last season. We lost at the Emirates Stadium on Sunday, the 14th of April, and that was for me when I felt that the title had gone. 2-0 defeat that day. We also lost 1-0 on Saturday, the 9th of December, 2023, and that was where I mentioned earlier on that Kai Havertz equaliser, or what we thought was an equaliser, was, in my view, controversially ruled out. At that point in the season, Arsenal were starting to flag a little bit. I had real concerns about the balance in our midfield. I had concerns about the tiredness that we were seeing from some of our players. It just didn't feel right. You know, there were a couple of periods like that over the course of the season. One was around then, and one was when we played Bayern Munich, and that was obviously, unfortunately for us, those 2 games were either side of an Aston Villa fixture again, which ultimately proved to be too much for us. So we'll be wary of Aston Villa, but there should be a motivation to go out there and correct that. The season before, we beat them at the Emirates by 2-1, and we won at Villa Park by 4-2. So there should be a real desire and hunger among this group to go out there and put that straight, put that right, because Aston Villa, you could argue, if you really want to fire yourself up for this weekend's game, cost us the Premier League title last season. You can't drop 6 points to Aston Villa if you're going to win the Premier League. Now, that's not to take anything away from them and the fantastic job that Unai Emery's done. We'll come on to talk about him in a minute. But you need to be at least taking a minimum of 3 points off of a side that are in Champions League contention. This is, and it's just the way it is now. There's so little margin for error. You've got to be taking points from pretty much everyone in the league. Are you going to have blips? Are you going to have ups and downs? Yes, you are, but you can't have many. You know why? Because Manchester City don't have many. So that's where we are. We need to go and put this right. We need to go make this right. We need to get back on the wagon when it comes to taking points off of Aston Villa. I'm not going to go through the season stats so far because there's very, very little to go by, but I will touch on Aston Villa's victory at West Ham United on the opening weekend. Now, for me, just having a quick look at Aston Villa's pre-season in the lead up to that game and listening to people who know far more about Aston Villa than I do, a good friend of mine, Sam Tai, who joins us on the 90 Min show quite regularly. He was on yesterday and he was talking about Villa's sort of opening weekend, how good the performance was, how impressed he was by how ready Villa looked. Because in pre-season, they didn't look ready, according to him. They looked like they were well below the level that they'd showed last season. There were concerns over the course of the summer about depth, and they've obviously worked really, really hard to try and improve that. A Champions League campaign is, of course, incredibly demanding, perhaps more so than ever now, given that the new format kicks in this year. And yeah, he was taken aback by how good they were on the day. And lots of things went well. Amadou Onana, who's just come in the side, big fee, player that we were linked with too, pops up with a header to break the deadlock away at West Ham early doors. Really, really good sign. And then a good performance from him overall. John Duran, who you feel was the cause of some perhaps friction, uncertainty in the Aston Villa dressing room because of his clear desire to move on and to join West Ham, the very club that he was playing against, then pops up, scores what proves to be the winning goal and gives it the whole "I'm staying here." Now, I don't know if he was talking about the Olympic Stadium or Villa Park because he was at the Olympic Stadium. But you know the point I'm trying to make. I just think, it took everybody surprised, I think, how good Villa were on the day. Not the result. Villa, a Champions League contender, a side that are going to be playing in Europe's premier competition this season. For them to go and win at West Ham isn't something that's out of the ordinary or something that deserves particular attention. But to perform the way they did after so many concerns from the Villa side of things going into the season, I think was really, really impressive. And listen, it's a good litmus test for them. It's a good litmus test for us. But obviously, they're the home side and they have that advantage. And at this stage in the season, where neither side is really at 100%, it's quite difficult to know what to expect. I think from an Arsenal point of view, while we were very sort of efficient against Wolves, and we took our opportunities and we ended up winning the game, I think we gave away a little bit too much for my liking in terms of chances. I think we dropped our level quite a bit physically after about 65 minutes, and we had to make changes. The start of the second half, even before I felt the physical level dropped, we seemed to lose concentration. We seemed to struggle. We seemed to make bad decisions, trying to play out from the back, etc., and doing it at the wrong times, unfortunately. So I look at that Wolves performance, and it isn't the type of performance that says to me, we're going to go to Villa Park and blow them away. Now, you'll be hoping that with another week of training and having got their first game under their belt, Arsenal will be in much better shape for the Villa game. But it isn't going to be easy. Obviously, over the course of the last week or so, everybody's been doing that debate. Unai Emery, Mikel Arteta. I think it's a lazy debate. I think it's a debate that, for the most part, lacks context. We will touch on that right after this short pause. We're not going to spend too much on it, but I do want to touch on that because I get annoyed by some of the basic things that people throw about when it comes to this debate. In fact, annoyed is an understatement. I get really, really pissed off. The Unai Emery versus Arteta thing. Look, Unai Emery is the right man for Aston Villa, but he was not the right man for Arsenal. Okay? And Mikel Arteta is. It's as simple as that. The thing that really gets under my skin is when people say Unai Emery is an elite coach, right at the top level, up there with the Pep Guardiolas and the Jurgen Klopps and the Carlo Ancelottis of this world. Why? Because he's won X amount of Europa Leagues. The clue is in the phrase Europa Leagues. Okay. Now, I'm not seeking to take anything away from Unai Emery and his achievements. Okay. He's done a wonderful job throughout his career at getting clubs to punch above their weight in cup competitions. His league record for someone that's classed as an elite manager is abysmal. That's the truth of it. That's the truth of it with Unai Emery. Okay. However, in cup competitions, he does come into his own and he's managed to steer clubs to competition victories that maybe you didn't expect. And for that, he deserves credit. He seems to be very good at molding sides that are slightly lesser fancied. He still needs a decent amount of resources. He's got that at Aston Villa. He was able to bring in players when he was at Sevilla. And he was certainly able to bring in players when he was at Paris Saint-Germain. But this is a guy that, for me, is not quite in that top bracket, but in fact in the second bracket. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm putting Mikel Arteta ahead of him in terms of what they have achieved in their careers to date. No, Mikel Arteta hasn't achieved a fraction of what Unai Emery has. But I tell you what, by the time he finishes his career, I'm quite confident in saying that he will have achieved more. Europa League victories, for me, they don't carry the same weight as Champions League victories, as title victories. They don't carry the same weight as even going to the semi-final of a Champions League, because there's a drop-off in the standards between those two competitions. So you can talk about Unai Emery, talk about what a great fit he is for Aston Villa. You can talk about what a good job he's done there at Sevilla in the past and at various other clubs. And you'd be absolutely right in saying that. Nobody here is saying that Unai Emery is a bad manager, but he is not an elite manager. Elite managers compete for the very biggest trophies. And given he's had all of that success, you'd have thought that he'd be at a club, or that's disrespectful to Aston Villa maybe, but that he'd have been at clubs competing or capable of competing for the Champions League a lot more than he has today. If you put Arsene Wenger in the Europa League every single year, which is what Unai Emery was doing for a long, long time, I'm sure he would have won a few Europa Leagues. If you put Jurgen Klopp in the Europa League every year, I'm sure he would have won more than Unai Emery did. If Pep Guardiola was in it every year, he'd have won more than Unai Emery did. The point is that it's a lot easier to achieve that than it is to achieve the success at the very, very highest level. And if you're talking about the very, very highest level, Unai Emery doesn't have that on his CV. That's my point when it comes to him. Good manager, great manager for Villa. All of that is true. But to pretend that he's on the same level as a Klopp or a Guardiola or an Ancelotti, and that Mikel Arteta today is miles and miles and miles behind him as a coach is just, yeah, it blows my mind. But anyway, we'll leave that. Let's move on to the team that I'd like to see put out against Villa this weekend. And I know this is maybe going to cause some debate. I'm interested to get your thoughts in the live chat. Remember, leave a like on the video if you're watching us. If you're listening to us, leave a review. Make sure you're subscribed to the Chronicles of a Gooner on whichever platform it is you prefer to take our content in from. Thank you, of course, for your continued support. As always, let's move on then to the team. Okay, so I think the areas of debate are the same areas of debate that we kind of had going into the opening weekend of the season. I think that left back is a position that there's always going to be debate around because we have so many options there now. I think centre backs nailed on, right back nailed on. I think there's maybe a debate in the midfield that wasn't there last week just because of one particular performance, and I'll come on to talk about that in a minute. I don't think there's a debate about who should be playing centre forward. I don't think there's a debate about who should be starting on the right. You could argue there's a debate, though, about who should be starting on the left. So this is the team that I have gone with, guys. So I have gone, whoops, wrong screen share. Let me fix that. Ever the professional me. Here we go. That's the one I want. Okay, so this is the team that I've gone with, guys. So I've gone with Raya in goal. I've gone with White, Saliba, Gabriel, and Timber. Across the back, I've gone with Partey, Odegaard, and Rice in midfield with Martinelli and King Kai up top, along with Bukayo Saka. Let me just rephrase that because I made a right mess of that, didn't I? Raya in goal, White, Saliba, Gabriel, and Timber across the back. Partey, Odegaard, and Rice are my midfield, with Saka and Martinelli playing either side of Kai Havertz. So, why have I gone with what I've gone with here? So, at left back, I've talked a lot about Alexander Zinchenko. I've talked a hell of a lot about Alexander Zinchenko over the course of the summer and over the course of recent weeks. And I think whilst he gives you so much on the ball, I worry about him defensively. I would argue that Timber could give you some of what Zinchenko gives you on the ball if he was to come into the team. I'm not saying he's as good as Zinchenko with those passes between the lines. In fact, I spent a long time, didn't I, after the Wolves game, waxing lyrical about Zinchenko's impact and effect. But I just think defensively, we can't afford to go somewhere like Villa Park with that fragility at the back. And so I'd bring in Jurriën Timber. Now, there's a debate that says, why not bring in Calafiori? He didn't have an injury 2 weeks ago, so why not use him instead? And that's a valid point as well. But I feel like a debut away at Villa might be a bit of a baptism of fire. And we know that Calafiori wasn't up to 100% fitness anyway, had a difficult, grueling summer. Jurriën Timber should be, in my estimations, better equipped to come in for this game. Obviously, there's a concern with him, though, as well, because he only played 15 minutes on the opening weekend. So it's not perfect. It's not ideal. But I just think that weighing it all up, I'd rather have Jurriën Timber at left back on Saturday than Alexander Zinchenko, who I'd worry about defensively. In the midfield, I've gone Partey, Rice, and Odegaard, and I talked a lot on the post-Wolves show about how I was worried about Partey's fitness levels. I'm hoping with another week, he's improved on that, and I think that, I would probably start with him, but I am worried about that a little bit as well. And I think I was tempted to play Jorginho. That was in my head this morning when I woke up. But then I looked at Villa's team that played against West Ham, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. And I looked at the physicality that they have in that midfield, and I worried about what would happen if you played Jorginho with a kind of not 100% fit Declan Rice, which is what he is at the moment. The guy was cramping up. You never see Declan Rice cramp up. So that was kind of the decisive factor for me. Martinelli would play down the left for me because I think that he can stretch them. He can open up spaces. Villa do like to play with a high line. If they play Matty Cash, who started at right back in the game against West Ham, they're going to want to bomb him on down that right-hand side. And I think Martinelli's got all the right attributes to potentially expose that space. If he doesn't get lots of free room, he's going to pin Matty Cash back, which will be doing us a favour as well, in a way that maybe Leandro Trossard couldn't do. And then up front, King Kai, he's been brilliant. He needs to continue in that position as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah, that's where I'm at in terms of the team. Raya in goal, White, Saliba, Gabriel and Timber across the back. Partey, Rice and Odegaard would be my midfield with Saka, Martinelli and Kai Havertz through the middle. So I looked at the Villa team, and their team, I haven't got a graphic for this, but the team that they selected against West Ham United was obviously Emi Martinez in goal. Cash was at right back. Konsa, Pau Torres and Dean made up the rest of the defence. Onana, Tielemans, Rodgers and McGinn were the midfield. And then Leon Bailey was playing kind of from the right, but kind of in that pocket behind Ollie Watkins as well. It's quite a fluid formation that Unai Emery plays with. When they're off the ball, they seem to make it into like a midfield four, and they push Bailey slightly more centrally in behind Ollie Watkins. But when they do have the ball, they try and open up the pitch and they try and use Leon Bailey in a wider area. They do lack a little bit of natural width on that left-hand side as far as midfielders go, but they end up pushing Luca Dean on beyond him. And we know he's got a good delivery and he's very capable of causing problems. But that midfield four is where I'm a little bit worried. Onana, physical powerhouse. Yuri Tielemans, you know, he can give it physically as well. I know people focus a lot on his technical ability, and rightly so, because he's so good. But he can give it physically as well. Morgan Rodgers, really powerful player, as we know, to our detriment before in the past. John McGinn is as well. So the thought of playing Jorginho in there was a little bit of a concern for me. But looking at the Villa team, there are a couple of areas where I think we can hurt him. I mentioned Matty Cash. I don't think he's the greatest defender for all his other qualities. I don't think Luca Dean is the best defender anymore for all his qualities. And I think Bukayo Saka, if he can isolate him, could potentially have him on toast. I think McGinn is going to play a massive role for Villa in terms of following back when needed, but trying to sort of protect maybe that half space on their left, our right, where Martin Odegaard likes to operate and likes to link up with Bukayo Saka. So it's going to be interesting to see how they try and cope with that. But yeah, I think the two fullbacks are where we need to hurt them. And I want relentless runners like Martinelli. I know that Trossard is more clinical in front of goal. I know that Trossard is a better decision maker in those situations. But I feel like energy is going to be really, really key in this game. And the great thing is that with someone like Trossard, you're not ever afraid to make that change, right? You're never afraid to shake it up and change it up slightly, because you know that you've got a quality player. And this comes into that point that we were talking about yesterday, where we were talking about depth. We were talking about depth, weren't we? And we were talking about how it's really important to be able to rotate. It's really important to be able to bring players off the bench. And even if, you know, Leandro Trossard isn't starting, he's going to play, and vice versa with Gabriel Martinelli. I do want to take some of your questions before I share my prediction. And remember, my prediction was spot on for the opening day, 2-0 win against Wolves. Let's see what you guys are saying on this. Wayland says, as good as Ben White is, he struggles against pacey wingers. I'd start Timber and Calafiori. I don't expect Villa to play, just based on what they did in the opening game. I don't expect them to have a pacey winger on the left-hand side. I think they're going to try and play in that slightly lopsided way that they have done under Unai Emery with great success. So I don't think Ben White is going to be tested with pace necessarily 1v1. And look, I could be wrong, but that's just how I see Villa setting up. I think it's on the other side that there's going to be troubles with pace and that kind of thing. So I'm not really worried about Ben White. I think Ben White's so reliable. So reliable. I never go into a game really concerned about him. Afsar asks, do I think we've made a mistake not signing Onana? Not really. He wasn't the one for us. We did a scouting report video on him, I think, and we talked about in depth why. I think that's the case. But yeah, no. I mean, look, people are going to peddle that narrative if he has a good game against us or scores a goal against us or something. But no, I think overall he's not the one for us. what else are you guys saying in the live chat? Wagner says, I just logged in and I was wondering what's happening with Declan Rice, whether he's fully recovered. As far as I know, he's fine. It was cramp that he suffered at the end of the game, which happens when you're tired. I'm sure they'd have managed him carefully over the course of the week. Lots of rest, lots of recovery time, and hopefully he'll be in a position to start the game and perform somewhere close to his best, because I don't think he did against Wolves, if I'm being completely honest. Prediction then, for me, I'm going to go with Aston Villa 1, Arsenal 1. I'm not saying I'd be satisfied with the point, but I didn't see enough against Wolves to say that we're in a place just yet. And that might be fine. You know, we might need to peak a little bit later on in the season. We peaked in the second half of last season and it got us closer than we were the year before. So maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I just didn't see enough against Wolves to confidently say that we're going to go up to Villa Park and win. So 1-1 draw is my prediction for this one. Let me know some of yours in the live chat as well. I'll just take this one question from Michael Taylor while you get some of your predictions in the live chat. And then, of course, we're going to sign off for today. Michael Taylor says, City bringing in Gundogan experience. Is this something that holds us back winning the league? Someone with experience winning the biggest competitions. Kai Havertz has won the Champions League. Jorginho has won the Champions League. Gabriel Jesus has won the Premier League. Zinchenko has won the Premier League. I don't really feel like that's as big of an issue today as it was. Mikel Merino is on his way in and he's just won the European Championships. I don't think we're lacking it so badly that that's going to be the decisive factor. And I think what maybe people overlook is how much we've learned over the last 2 seasons being in the race. And in the case of last season, taking it right down to the wire. So I'm not too fussed about that. Listen, I made it very, very clear. I would have loved us to get Ilkay Gundogan in, but that couldn't happen. It wasn't going to be done. He had his heart set on Manchester City and he's headed back there. A free transfer. It just annoys you, doesn't it? That, you know, look, I know this is going to be really unpopular. I rate Gundogan more than I rate Mikel Merino, even at 33. And so when you've just spent 30 plus million on Mikel Merino and you could have got Gundogan for free, I know the wages are a big part of this as well. It is a little bit like, but anyway, Merino's coming in now. Wish him all the best. Hopefully produces for us. And hopefully in time, I'm sitting there saying, I can't believe I ever doubted that this signing was going to move the needle. But hey, we are where we are. Right, let's take some of your predictions. Ian says 1-0 or 2-1 tight win. I want the game to be boring, especially if we score first. You can't give 2 predictions. Come on. Afsar's gone 1-1 like me. Sammy's gone 2-1. Is that 2-1 to the Arsenal? I'm assuming. Joey Lodegaard's gone 2-1 as well. We've got a 3-1 away win for the Arsenal from Wagner. Henry says that we're going to win by a goal to nil. I'll take any form of victory. I don't care if it's a 97th minute goal that goes off of Ezri Konsa's backside and into the back of the net. Just need the 3 points at this stage while we're building ourselves up, getting into our rhythm for a new season. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all so much for joining me. As always, really appreciate your company. Like, subscribe, review. You know the drill by now. It really, really does help. I will see you soon. Yeah, looking forward to chatting to you after, of course, the game tomorrow night. And of course, that will be on Patreon. But then we'll be back on Sunday with a full, in-depth, in-detail review of the game. Looking forward to bringing you that. Until then, take care of yourselves. Have a great Friday. Goodbye.